Hey guys, it's a really cool game. I've got an opponent rated 1336 and I have the white pieces. And I start with e4. I've literally just played this game. I'm going to play it through again for you. And we have the modern defense. Okay, and this really does set the theme for the entire game. So the idea with this, if you could call this a King's Indian. So he wants to fianchetto his bishop there. He wants to put his knight here. He wants to castle kingside. Now, because I've played my e pawn forward, he will want to push d6 at some point to prevent a pawn coming there and harassing the knight. So I go ahead and grab the centre, principal play. Now d6 comes because he wants to bring his knight to here and doesn't want me to advance e5 and lose tempo. So I develop my bishop, he develops his knight. I develop my knight, we've now double defended this pawn. Bishop indeed comes out. And now a third defender on this pawn by developing my bishop. Another idea as well, another reason for bringing this bishop out, maybe put the queen behind the bishop and then drop in at some point and eliminate this dark squared bishop that's in charge of protecting the dark squares on this side of the board where the king's going to be. Alright, so pins my knight. I am unconcerned. I push c3. This could release my queen. But also it's adding another defender. So what I'm figuring out is here, because one idea that I thought was, hey, how about knight d2? Knight b to d2. So if he takes, I can recapture with the knight. Yeah. However, if I put my knight there, then remember he's got two attackers on this pawn. Okay, but this guy would be pinned. So if I put my knight here, he could take. If I take, he recaptures for free because the knight can't recapture, right? So that's no good. So I push c3, and he takes. I recapture with the g-pawn, okay? Because I know from his opening that his intention is to put his king here. So having a semi-open g-file is good for me. My rook, my h-rook is going to find its way there at some point. Now e6 is played. So you can see here, this is and the reason it was called the modern defense on move 1 is because with that move, g6, black has made no attempt to contest these squares on my side of the board, right? So he's almost giving up the center, and this is the modern approach, which was, I think, popularized in like the 20th century. So it's relatively recent. Previously, everyone wanted to play classical chess, where you should compete for the center straight away. The idea with the modern approaches or hyper-modern approaches is that you allow your opponent to grab the center and then you will compete for the center in the middle game. All right, so now I bring out my knight to d2. It needs to be developed, and I'm undecided yet where I'm going to castle, but if I castle, it's going to be that way. Certainly not going to be kingside now. Okay, he moves his knight out. Fair enough. I play my queen to e2, giving myself the possibility of castling queenside if I wish, and now a6 is played. So we've got the idea of some counterplay now on the queen side. So I strike on the other side of the board, h4. Now he attacks my bishop, bishop retreats to d3. Okay, so now we're very much feeling in this situation where, especially after h5, feels like my opponent is trying to come around the edges and my army is in the middle. So it's like he's trying to outflank me almost. But I'm feeling pretty safe here. I have a nice pawn structure. I have an extra f-pawn, which may come in handy. So now I push f4, because I know where his king's going, right? And I need to press my advantage. I have this semi-open g-file, that's a plus for me, right? The extra f-pawn, which was a g-pawn, is a plus for me. Okay, and indeed he castles. May not have been the smartest move. If there is a semi-open file, you have to ask the question, would his king have been better off staying in the middle of the board? Okay, a lot of people ask, when should you castle? Should you always castle? Which side should you castle? And this is a good example of that. So rook g1. Very straightforward, basic principle move. I'm lining up my rook against this king, okay? So there could be, for example, options of, let's say this bishop wasn't there, then I could capture that pawn with my queen, its defender is pinned. Now the king moves out of line. So with that move, I force my opponent to have to react. Now my knight comes into f3, so my knight has made it from here to here, and now it wants to come in at some point and maybe give check. But it's all about the timing. So now rook h8, and it looks almost as though he's uncastling here. Okay, I'm not really sure of the point of that move actually. So now I play my king to d2. So I've decided, look, he's got pawns advancing up the queen side, right? I don't think I want to put my king here and leave him vulnerable. I want my pieces around my king, because my pieces control squares, right? You know, this knight is controlling loads of squares, queen, everything. There is no getting through. No piece can get through here, right? He might try and disturb me with pawns at some point, but pieces, I don't think he's going to have much hope. And now he plays a really, really weird move. Knight back to a7. Don't know what the point is of that, because that knight is playing no part in the proceedings right now. So now I lift my rook to g2. What's the plan? Very basic. Rook a to g1, giving myself a battery up the g file. The king is now potentially pinned there on the side of the board. So c4 is pushed. So what's he doing? Is he coming after my bishop? That's no trouble. Does he want to capture my pawn? I might even swap off there. You know, if bishop takes, recapture with a knight. We'll see. So I put my rook on g1 anyway. Right? I'm keeping the pressure on this guy. Pawn pushes up. I think this is a mistake by black, because I simply duck my bishop out of the way, and now we have gridlock pawns. And no piece can get through that on that file, right? Because black's pieces can't capture black's pawn, and my pieces can't capture my pawn. So this is good for me. I'm happy to see that. Now the queen comes down. What's the queen doing here? Okay, so I've got ideas now. If my knight comes in at some point, well, the king's got a couple of squares. So that's not a devastating attack, but I'm building to an attack. And this is what you do in the middle game. You have to build up to an attack. However, black is threatened to capture this pawn here. So I have to evaluate now. Is it worth allowing black to burn a move taking that? Can I use that to my advantage with some kind of attack? And I decide there is no immediate winning attack, so a3. Defend the pawn. Now the knight comes back round, and now it's time. Now it's time to push, make this f5 break, right? I've had this in my pocket for several moves, okay? And here's what I'm thinking. Because, I mean, I haven't played it previously, for example here, okay? Because he's got 1, 2, 3 pieces guarding that square. I've got one pawn and then a bishop, right? So that doesn't really make sense. So if I go there, he captures, I capture, he might capture again, and nothing's really been achieved. However, after this, now that I've got two rooks here, completely different story, because now this pawn really cannot capture there, okay? Because rook takes bishop, check, right? King here, rook here potentially, if that pawn's not there, there are mating opportunities. So now we take, and he can't recapture. So rook comes across now, potentially, he's lining up with my queen, so I need to be aware of that. Pawn takes g6, check. Knight takes, okay? And now my bishop is pinned. So got to remember that. Bishop takes knight. Pawn takes. Rook takes. And now, look how scattered black's pieces are. So this bishop is under serious threat. He's got 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 options. So he moves his rook across to g8. And now I grab the free pawn. I thought about that for a minute. But look, it's a free pawn. It's in the middle of the board. It's in the way of this guy. It might be instrumental. We'll see. Queen now comes up to c7, attacking my rook. Now, key moment in the game. What would you play as white? So I think about this for a while, minute and a half. No, well, a minute. right? And I figure that now is the time to go in with a knight. Okay, finally, I've had that move sitting there begging to be played for a while, but it's never been the right time. Now, there's only one move for black. He's going to have to move his king into the corner because the rook is guarding this rank, yeah? So the king moves into the corner. And now, I mean, I do actually have a winning combination. But what I figured was, if the queen was to capture that rook now, look what I've got. A knight fork on king and queen, the royal fork. Okay? So this rook is now poisoned with the knight there. However, then I realise, after a minute, queen h5 check is actually winning. Because there's only one way to get out of check again, and then the only way to prevent reason that's not checkmate is he has queen to there, and then queen takes queen, and that's done. So interesting lesson there, I think, in how to play against modern systems like the Pirc defense, with my opponent failing to, or declining the opportunity to grab the center, allowing me to get the center. And now, tactically, I think with this exchange and me recapturing with the g-pawn, I think he should have changed his plan. I really do. I mean, he could still have competed for the center at this point. Right? He's got bishop, pawn, knight, all looking at e5. But after this, and again, look at this. So he wants to stop my h-pawn from coming up and disturbing this. Right, so he's kind of forced to play h5, which is potentially weakening, right? It means this pawn's only defended by one pawn, was defended by two. Doesn't seem like much, but it can make a difference. But now, castling onto the semi-open file, I think, was an error on my opponent's part, okay? And then I think the other key decision for me as well was deciding not to castle. In this instance, why don't I want to castle? Well, there's not much material around here on the queen side, right? I want my pieces around my king. I want my king to be safe. This is number one priority, okay? So that my army is free to dive in and dismantle black's position. And if you look at black's position here, it really isn't terribly strong. Let's just flip the board. And if you're black now, put yourself in black's shoes, and you can do this during a game as well. Just hit X on the keyboard if you're playing in the browser. You can also flip the screen in the mobile app as well on chess.com and pretty much every chess app. But if you're black here, you're thinking, well, what can I do, right? Look at all these squares are guarded by my pawns, right? My rook's guarding all of this. It's pretty much impenetrable, right? And this is the key. This is why we say control the center at the start of the game. Because time has told, history, hundreds of thousands of chess games, millions of chess games, have shown people that controlling the center makes sense. So what do you do as black? You know, he's got almost no moves here. So he plays his knight backwards. And now I realise it's because he had nothing, okay? And now he makes a bit of a break. White's unconcerned. Right, so that particular kind of attack has fizzled out. Queen comes in, white's unconcerned. Knight comes back round, and now white strikes. Takes. Can't recapture, because the bishop will fall. So line up the rook against the queen, that was decent, okay? Take the pawn with check, I'm busting open his position. Right? Bishop takes with check. His position is crumbling. Now a rook comes in, grabs the free pawn. He has to defend the bishop. Okay, maybe queen down here would have been more flexible. That was an idea, which he does play now, but it's too late. His position is gone. Look at all the space there. And look, my king has not been bothered once during the game. Really hasn't been bothered. Right? He's quite happy sitting there on d2 and just sit back and watch the fireworks, okay? And it's all over. So there you go. That's I mean, you can't. The Pirc's defense is perfectly valid. It's played at the highest levels, but here this shows that when you're playing against an intermediate level player, every kind of approach to chess has its plus sides and has its weaknesses. And here, I think in this game, we've really exposed some of those weaknesses in that modern approach. So hope that's been useful for you, because you will be facing the Pirc's defense quite often. And so I hope you've got some ideas from this on, in general, how you should approach that kind of game, how you should approach the opening, how you should approach the middle game as well. So there you go. I hope it's useful. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe to Chess Bootcamp if you haven't subscribed. See you soon.